Good morning, everyone, and welcome to a special edition of The Bubble. Today, we are joined by Calvin Robinson. Now, Calvin is a former teacher and educator turned political activist and media commentator. He's also a self proclaimed tech geek, a man after my own heart, given my background, and a political podcaster. A man who obviously wears many hats. Calvin has risen to public prominence over the past few short months following views expressed on the left wing bias within the education sector, and more specifically, his views on both woke culture and critical race theory, which we'll be discussing with him today. Calvin, it's great to see you. Good morning and welcome to The Bubble. How are you?
Paul, my old campaign buddy. I'm good, thanks. How are you doing?
I'm very well. It's always great to see you. Calvin, I wanted to obviously talk to you about the things that I mentioned in the introduction, and I've gone so far as explaining who you are in terms of what you've done. But I want to actually start off by getting to know the real you. I want people to see the real Calvin Robinson, so to speak, beyond what you've done and no doubt what you'll go on to achieve. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your background, your values and belief system, and what drives you on in life to achieve the things that you have achieved so far.
The real Calvin Robinson. That's a scary prospect. No, all jokes aside, I am very WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. So when people read my articles or see me online, that is who I am. I come from a former miners' town in the Midlands. We were one of the first ethnically mixed families in the town. Um, my mother raised me and my sister alone, pretty much. And I think a lot of my small c conservative values come from that upbringing, come from the idea that, you know, a lot of people around us in the town were, I wouldn't say sponges, but they were a lot better off staying at home, doing nothing, living on benefits, compared to my mother, who always worked at least two jobs to feed and clothe me and my sister. And that, I think that instilled in me this sense of hard work, these ethical values of, you know what, people need a hand up, not a handout. And there was always an element of injustice in our system to me. This welfare state that we live in that encourages people to be dependent on the state, and I think that's wrong. I think the state should be a safety net for people who need it. It shouldn't be the default option. It shouldn't be the most convenient option. We want people out there contributing to society, contributing to their community with a sense of duty and service, providing for their family, and not expecting handouts from the state to do their job for them. And I think that's not just a financial, that's not just a fiscal argument, that affects every element of our day-to-day lives in so many ways, especially now with what we're going through with COVID-19. I find that the state wants to step in. It wants to replace the family. It wants to be the family rather than supplementing it. And that's the core of my politics, is family. Family is at the center of everything we do. It's where we get our morals, our ethics from. It's where we understand boundaries and the law. It's where we understand love, service, duty. All of these things come from the family. And so that is my politics in a nutshell.
Prior to politics, as I mentioned, you were a teacher, you were an educator. What drove you to become or to take up that profession?
Um, well, that's a good question. So before I was a teacher, I worked in tech, as you mentioned. You know, I did mobile apps, web development, that kind of stuff. It was very, very, yeah, it was great fun. I had a good time. Worked in the city for a while, made a bit of money, made some good friends, but it was all quite a superficial lifestyle. It was definitely not something you can do forever. And at the same time I was doing this, I discovered that, well, not so much discovered, but all of the work we wanted to do, we had a bottleneck. We outsourced pretty much all of our development to either Eastern Europe or Asia, and that was always problematic for me because I'm thinking, why can't? Where is the homegrown talent? Why are we? Why we're not outsourcing because we were cheap, or you know, we didn't want to get slave labor abroad or anything like that. This is just where the talent was. This is just where the programmers are. They're in Eastern Europe and they're in Asia. And I'm like, so why don't we have good programmers in the UK? And it turns out we have a massive digital skills deficit. So I looked into this and figured, well, what is the problem? Maybe I can help. And I saw that there was a gap there in that there are no computer science teachers in this country. So I trained up myself to become a computer science teacher, and then I got involved in the DFE's Get Into Teaching campaign to encourage more people to do so. But we just don't have enough. And I can understand it, because if you're a computer programmer, why would you go work in a school when you could go work for Goldman Sachs like the rest of my peers did, and a lot of money. But it's about instilling again this sense of service, duty, commitment to the community, to the country, and I think we need more of that. And if more people look around and think, actually, am I being fulfilled? Is this worth it? Is this all there is? If people are thinking that, then teaching is a good avenue to get into, because it is a vocation. It's not a job. It is giving back, and it is contributing in a positive way toward the next generation.
Do you think those core values in terms of giving back to society is really what motivated you to get involved in politics?
Yes, some of that is giving back. I'm not completely philanthropic. I do have ambitions as well, and I think another element of why I'm in politics is not just to give back, but to change, to make a difference, to make things better. I think all of us in politics are either a little bit naive or a little bit arrogant in thinking that we can change the way things are, and because for the most part things aren't perfect. A lot of us are unhappy with the way things are, and I want to see a lot of change in this country. I think this is a fantastic country. It's a great place to live, but there are so many elements that need adjusting. And I got involved in politics through the local level. My local residents association, we were campaigning up the Kensal Rise to make sure that all the buses were green. And we appealed to the Mayor of London, who was Boris Johnson at the time, and we made sure that we did it. All our buses that go, there are so many bloody buses that go up the high street, but all of the ones that go up the high street now are green. And that was one of the first campaigns I was involved in. I loved it, and I got involved in Camden Tories, as you well know, and kind of campaign on a local level there, just from trying to make a difference, trying to make things better for myself, my family, the people around me, and the rest of the community.
So, in terms of your politics at the moment, you're involved in a very exciting project at the moment. What can you tell us about that in terms of your role, what you're doing, and how your involvement came to be?
Um, yeah, that's a vague statement, because I'm involved in a lot of exciting things in politics at the moment. I think it's a great time to be in politics. So I do some advisory stuff. I consult for parliamentarians, whether they're ministers or MPs, particularly on race-related issues, CRT, BLM, Black History, that kind of stuff. Um, Not because that's not just that, but it's not a passion of mine. It's not something I've wanted to talk about. I got involved in politics mainly through education and talking about that. But it's just there is so much going on in the race sector that needs to be addressed that I just can't keep quiet on. I have to talk about it. So yeah, I've been advising people in politics about that. But also a good friend of mine, Lawrence Fox, has set up his own party, and I wanted some political advice around that too. So I've been more than happy to help with that. He's doing really great things. I think it's important to have people like him fighting back on the cultural issues, because the main two parties aren't even addressing them, let's be honest. Labour, I don't know where Labour have been for the last 5 years, but the Conservative Party were just beginning to wake up to these cultural issues. And this is a war, and it's not brought on by us, but we are in a war. We are in a battle right here for our culture and for our way of life. And the Tories have just woken up to it, but now they're taking a side step and saying, actually, we don't want to touch this stuff anymore. With Cummings and Kane gone, and Carrie now in charge, the focus seems to be on green issues, and which is fine. I'm an environmentalist. I care about the environment, but I do think there are other things going on in this country that need to be addressed. So it's good to have parties and people on the outside making a difference, and holding the government to account where Her Majesty's most loyal opposition is not, where they're failing to do so.
Do you think, politically speaking, that there is a real void in terms of giving people a real voice within Parliament? Because, as you said, you have a government, you have an opposition party who are supposed to be there opposing the government. We don't really seem to be seeing much of that at the moment, and probably haven't done for a while. Do you think that this is an ideal opportunity for a new party to come along and be the voice of Middle England, so to speak, and the average working person?
That's exactly it. So, the Labour Party obviously used to be the party of the working class, and now The Labour front bench is more higher, they're more upper class than the Tory front bench. More of them have been to top quality schools and universities than most than most Conservative politicians at this point. So they can't represent, or they don't represent the people they used to. I don't think they have the ear to the ground either. So I don't feel like you have to be from a working class background to understand working class people, but you have to have your ear to the ground. You have to talk to the common folk, the normal people in the red wall areas and places like that. And I don't think the Labour Party are doing it, but I don't think the Tories are doing it either, and that is the problem. And I think that is what we're doing, talking to the everyman, standing up for the everyman. The silent majority in this country are small c conservative. They care about common sense values, Christian values, and they don't really care for all of the woke progressive nonsense that's being pushed in Westminster. And in that bubble, people forget about that for some reason. It's really frustrating. But yeah, that is absolutely why these smaller parties can have so much influence, and they can do such a good job because they can put pressure on the government to make sure that they are held to account in these areas. We saw the same with the Brexit Party last year. You know, if it wasn't for the Brexit Party, I'm pretty sure we wouldn't be getting the Brexit that we've gotten so far. Not that that's entirely legitimate at the moment. We'll see what happens with this deal. But we actually left. We got Brexit done, which I don't think would have happened if it weren't for the Brexit Party.
You just mentioned earlier that you are involved to some extent with Lawrence Fox's new party, the Reform Group or the Reform UK. What's the situation with the name? Because there was some degree of controversy around the name and in terms of registering the party and so forth. What's the situation in that?
So Reform is Nigel Farage's party, his new party. Right. Reclaim is Lawrence Fox's party. Reclaim is still in the process of getting everything approved by the Electoral Commission. These things take a lot of time. There's a lot of bureaucracy involved. It's kind of uninteresting, to be honest with you. But after Reclaim was announced, Nigel announced his Reform Party as well, which I think are going to fight some of these issues. And that's brilliant. If there's a pincer movement going on there, doubling the efforts to make sure that the cultural issues are addressed in Parliament, fantastic. The more the merrier.
Do you see yourself at any point representing this new party of Lawrence's? And
I don't see myself standing for election again, to be honest with you, Paul. I've been there, done that. That was great fun, but I'm working in other ways to influence policy.
Because you did actually represent the Brexit Party up in Nottingham, didn't you, in Nottinghamshire? But you stood down. Why was that?
Yeah. So I was standing against good old Stoobs, Anna Soubry in Broxtowe, which is quite funny because I helped get her in the first time around. I was campaigning up there for her. She's still got a photo of me in her office, which I think probably explains why she's so bitter at the moment, bless her. It was amazing fun, but I stepped down because at the end of the day, I didn't want to split the vote. I only got involved to put pressure on the government and make sure that they got Brexit done. That was the key aim there. I'm not a party political loyalist. I am a principled man, and I think Brexit is up there for me on one of the most important issues of this generation. You know, we had this vote. We gave the people a say. Yes, it was an advisory vote. Who cares? It was a vote that we said we would implement the results of, so therefore we have to implement the results of it. And for the government and the whole of Parliament to be umming and ahhing about it, the previous government that is, was just not okay. It wasn't acceptable. So so that's why I stood for the Brexit Party and stood down when it became clear that Boris was going to come through. And I didn't want to split the vote in Broxtowe, and I campaigned hard for Darren Henry, who is now the Conservative MP in that area. Fantastic bloke. I'm so glad that he got in. And as did a number of our Tory friends, got in to ensure that Brexit did get done. And it did. And we got that 80-strong majority, and I'm very happy about that.
Excellent. I want to move away now from your political career just for one moment. And I wanted to talk to you about something that was in the news last week. It appears that the statue of Thomas Guy that is located within the King's College campus has been boxed up, and there is a note attached to that box that reads, and I'll just quote it: "The statue has been removed from public viewing pending discussions about its future." The letter goes on to say that Guy's and St Thomas's charity are engaging with and receiving guidance from the Mayor of London's new Commission for Diversity in the Public Realm. So this is Sadiq Khan's new commission, or Quango if you like, that are tasked with the responsibility of reviewing the historical appropriateness of the capital's public statues. What are your views on that?
Very dangerous wording, that isn't. Historical appropriateness. When is history not appropriate? I worry about this whole thing. So this is one of the core elements of the cultural wars. It's not one that I'm addressing personally, but a lot of my friends are. So I'm working at the Policy Exchange on the History Matters project, and a lot of my colleagues are working on the statues front. I'm on the education, but they're working on the statues front because people are trying to rewrite our history here. We are getting this year zero effect that everything before now is bad, evil, wrong, needs to be erased, and we'll start from scratch. This is the new standard. But until when? How long until we look back on today's moral standards and say, actually, well, that was inappropriate too, and erase that? I don't think it's productive. I think, we learn from our history by studying it, so we have to keep these things around. But also, it's not just about our history. It is about, we are kind of protectors of our cultural heritage, and it's not just for us. These statues are not just for us or for our ancestors. They are for the future. They are for future generations. It's our job to protect that for them. And it's problematic for so many reasons. We don't put statues up to say this person was perfect or this is an idol that we need to worship. We put them up to commemorate or memorialize certain events or figures or parts of their things that they've done, whether it's founding charities or hospitals or whatever. We're not saying that these are perfect people. If you want people to look up to the saints or look up to Christ himself. I don't think you can kind of look up to other human beings in the way that people think that we ought to be doing. But the way we're looking at statues and saying, okay, that one needs to be removed, that one needs to be removed, where does this stop as well? What is the point of even having any statues? I don't think anyone will survive this cull. Sadiq Khan has his commission, which is not just looking at what statues to remove, but looking at how to diversify the capital. To some extent, I'm in favor of that. I've got no problem with introducing new statues. If there are influential people we want to commemorate or memorialize, fantastic. And if some of them happen to be of ethnic diversity backgrounds, brilliant. But that shouldn't be the defining factor. We should not be looking, we need more Black people, we need more Asian people, whatever. That's a really strange criteria. We should be looking for people like Tim Berners-Lee, people who have made a massive contribution to this country. And that is something we can all get behind, and it's something that unites us. And that's a key message of everything that I think we should be looking at in these cultural wars, thinking, will this help unite us? Will this help social cohesion in this country? If so, great. If not, why are we doing it?
Do you think this revisionist approach to history in some ways can be a good thing, or do you think that we are heading down a very slippery slope, both socially and culturally, within this country?
Yes, the latter. I don't think this is a good thing. I was looking on the news earlier this week. A load of street names in Birmingham are being named or renamed. We've got Equality Street or Equality Road or something, and all these kind of really woke, progressive, diverse nonsense names that mean nothing and are supposed to be really, really nice. And it's just, what are we doing? What are we honestly doing? And then in Watford, where I am right now, they're talking about renaming Rhodes Way and changing a lot of street names. People don't think, oh God, Rhodes Way, I don't want to walk down there. That's a racist street. People don't think like that. Like, you don't see the statue of Thomas or anyone. You don't see any statue think, oh my God, I'm so offended right now. That guy, someone in his past or at some point in his past, there was a link to slavery. It's like, who's taking offense at these things anyway? I don't think people are. But even if they are, there's nothing wrong with being offended, and that is a personal choice. We're so entitled, aren't we, in the West, that to be offended is now the ultimate crime. It's like if someone offends you, they are the most evil person in the world. It's like, no, we're privileged that we can be offended, and that's probably the worst thing that will happen to us in our day. Whereas people in lots of other places around the world don't have the luxury of being offended because they are being literally oppressed. We've still got lots of modern day slavery going on around the world. We've got countries where gay people are stoned to death, where women can't show their face in public. Yet over here, we're offended by a statue whose ancestors may or may not have had links to slavery in a country that abolished slavery. It's all bonkers. The world is upside down. We need to end it. Not end the world, end this woke nonsense and win these cultural wars.
Do you think that politicians, such as Sadiq Khan as Mayor of London, when they set up these commissions, whether they're well intentioned or not, actually reflects the need to look at the past in a different way and therefore is a good thing? Or do you think that in actual fact it just really does more harm than good?
Yeah, I don't think they are doing this with good intentions. I think most of the time these woke commissions are set up to not even to appease, because most people don't want them. It's for appearances. They want to be seen to be the wokest, the most woke. They want to be seen to be the most liberal, the most progressive, uh, the most anti-racist, or the most anti-sexist, or the most anti-whatever. Um, that's what it's all about. It's all about politics. It's not actually about helping people. These removing these statues does not help anyone's life in any way. If anyone in this country is feeling oppressed and or victimized by something, removing a statue isn't going to help them. It's all nonsense. Like taking a knee on a football pitch isn't going to help anybody. All of these movements are very superficial, which is why I take an issue with them, because they're nonsense.
Do you think, generally speaking, though, that we need to have a better understanding of history and therefore figures who are prominent within our history and see them in the entirety rather than for the individual things that they've done or not done in their lifetimes, and also taking into context the world as it was at the time that they were alive?
Yeah, absolutely, that's the key. I talk a lot about the history curriculum, being a former teacher, because we designed the curriculum around current events, around events in history that have helped shape this nation. So we talk about British history, we talk about European history and world history, things that have shaped the nation to become what it is today, right? So we don't look at history based on what's black history or white history or what color people were, or who people were. We look at the events and the people involved in those events, the influential figures in history, and we teach it holistically. We teach, Winston Churchill um, is one of the key figures that helped put a stop to fascism around Europe, around the world. That was a major thing that he did. But we also teach about, him as a holistic person. He may have had problems with alcoholism. He may have said some things that today would have been considered controversial, but that doesn't make him an evil person. Likewise, um, I wouldn't necessarily say we should worship him. I'm not, again, I don't believe in idolatry, but at the same time, he was someone who had a major impact on shaping this nation into the country it has become today. And that's what we need to look at. You're absolutely right. Everything needs to be taught holistically, but I think it is. We have a very broad and balanced curriculum. People talk all the time about how we don't learn enough about X, Y, Z, but I don't think people are truly remembering what they were taught. It's easy to say, "Oh, we didn't learn about X, Y, Z," but are you sure you didn't, or do you just not remember being taught it? Because it could have been down to bad teaching, it could be down to bad learning, bad memory, but also what was taught several years ago is not the same as what's being taught now. The history curriculum changed in 2012, 2013, came into practice 2014. So most of the people moaning about the curriculum not being broad or diverse enough weren't taught the current curriculum, which is available on the internet. Go look it up, people. It's very broad, balanced, diverse, and all those things. It's very holistic. I think it's a fantastic curriculum or framework for schools to take on board. So people just like to kind of have a bit of a rant, I think.
Where do you think this new woke culture comes from? Because as you rightly said earlier, the average person on the street, they don't walk down the street and think, look at the name of the street and think, well, this is a very racist named street. Similarly, they don't look at statues of, say, for instance, Sir Winston Churchill or even Gandhi and automatically think they shouldn't be on display because they were racist or they were inappropriate for whatever reason. So where does it come from?
It comes from this insidious woke culture comes from, well, a lot of it's identity politics that has been infesting our public institutions over the last 2, 3 decades. Um, they talk about the long march through the institutions, and that was quite literally happening all along. Years and years ago, we saw this kind of stuff cropping up in universities, in academia. and people kind of shrugged it off, like, yeah, they'll just leave those student unions to do whatever they're doing and whatnot. And then it became more prevalent and more prevalent, and now it's all throughout school. It's in our museum bodies. It's in our government quangos. It's everywhere, and it's it's every HR department has some kind of IDPOL busybody who kind of wants to tick every box and appear, like I say, very liberal progressive for the sake of it, to look like a good guy or to not look like a bad guy. Yuri Bezmenov was talking about this a long time ago, saying, this is how the East, this is how countries like Russia and China bring down the West by kind of infecting us with this woke culture that eats itself. The left will constantly eat itself to the point of destroying us. And we see it all over the place. These neo-Marxists like Black Lives Matter, the people behind it are clearly Marxists. They're anti-family, they're anti-police, they're anti our way of life, essentially, and anti-Semitic quite often too. And they want to destroy our way of life, and they want to rebuild society in a Marxist image. That's why they call capitalism white capitalism, to make it sound more evil, because anything white is bad these days. So the people at the top are doing that, but then a lot of people underneath are manipulated into thinking, well, this is a good cause because it's anti-racist, and who doesn't want to be anti-racist? Of course, I'm for that. I'll protest for that. I'll put out a banner for that. My school can support that. My company can support that. And what's happening is it's infesting the whole of our society. And then the people at the top are like, well, yes, but we need to defund the police because too many black kids are getting shot. And you're like, well, wait a minute, who's shooting black kids in our country? Our police don't even have guns for the majority. So yes, it's been a long game. The hard left have been at this for a long time. They know what they're doing, and it's working. This is why we need to fight back. But it's not a left wing versus right wing issue. It is very much a woke versus common sense or common folk issue.
So how do we move beyond this division in order to rebuild social and societal cohesion? Is it a short-term battle, or is it a more long-term battle of the minds? How do we overcome it?
We just have to focus on the things that unite us, the things that bring us together. We have to redefine our identities. We're British first and foremost. We might have a load of other elements to our identity, whether we're black, mixed race, white, whatever, what our religion is. All of these things are important to us. Our gender, our sexuality, all of these things make up our character, but we have to focus on the elements of our identity that unite us with other people, rather than focusing on the parts of our identity that split us apart from other people. And that's what's been going on. That's where the division's been stoked up from. It's like, well, we're the Black Lives Matter, or we're the gender, whatever, LGBT lobby. We are all these different communities, which aren't really communities, are kind of just dividing people. Whereas if we look at our local communities first and foremost, our family, and then the area that we live in, and then our country, Great Britain, focus on all of the things that solidify that idea, that Britishness idea that is quite intangible. It's quite hard to explain, but we all know what it is, and we all know why it's so important, especially the everyman. And again, this is another separation where Westminster have lost touch with that sense of Britishness. So have a lot of our intellectuals in academia. But most people you speak to on the street, as you all know, as a campaigner, most normal folk do care about a sense of British culture and British values. The more we emphasize that, the more we bring people back together, the less of an impact the woke will have on our society, and the more social cohesion we can bring back.
So your message basically is, let's focus on the positive things that unite us rather than the things that differentiate and divide us as a society.
100%. And if we do that and we focus on that for a few years, we'll be in a much better place than we are now.
Amen to that. You mentioned the Black Lives movement just recently. Again, I don't know if you caught up with it, but Trevor Phillips is obviously a very renowned Times columnist and also the former chair of the Equality and Human Rights Commission. He recently appeared on Spectator TV, where he was asked his views on critical race theory, which is, for those who don't know and understand, is the controversial worldview that drives a lot of movements like the Black Lives Matter movement. He said, and I quote, "These guys don't really care very much about whether black people are advanced or not. What they want is for us to be a battering ram for their desire to change society." I just wanted to firstly ask you, what is critical race theory for those people at home who don't know and understand what it means?
Yeah, so I think first of all, Trevor is fantastic. He's a good friend of mine. I work with him at Policy Exchange. He's somewhat of a mentor, and he is spot on with all of this. So critical race theory is this idea that, and it comes from identity politics, as all these ideologies do. It is the idea that white people are by default privileged, and an element of that privilege is that is the fact that they are naturally in a position of power over ethnic minorities, and the ethnic minority people are somehow naturally oppressed, naturally in a victimhood state, and therefore need to be helped by white people, and white people need to get out of their way and listen to black people's lived experiences and all of this nonsense. But it all comes around the fact that one group of people are oppressors, the other group of people are victims, and that is so divisive in its nature because, of course, of course, white people aren't privileged by default. As a teacher, I see a lot of the time white working class kids are the most left behind in our country, and I know that's becoming a cliche now to say, yeah, but what about white working class kids? But what about them? It's not fair to perpetuate this myth that somehow people are privileged or not based on the color of their skin. Likewise, from the other end of this argument, black people are not naturally oppressed or victims of society just because they happen to be black. I think we live in a very free country with equal opportunities. It's not a complete meritocracy, but nowhere is, but we're trying, and we're improving all the time. And people in this country can become whatever the hell they want to become. We're all free under the law. We're all equal under the law. There's nothing stopping a black person becoming the first black prime minister, just as much as nothing stopped women becoming prime ministers in the country. Anyone can do anything. Just keep your head down, work hard, and make a success of your life, and stop looking for excuses. And that's not me blaming victims here. I don't think people who are stuck in this mentality, I don't think it's their fault. I don't think people think, oh, my life. Well, there are obviously some people that think, okay, my life is rubbish and it's just because I'm black. But for the most part, I don't think it's that. I think it's that we're teaching people this. We're saying, look, you are a victim. You are oppressed. You are held back. There are so many hurdles for you to overcome in your life. I'm so sorry for you. And if people tell you that over and over and over again, eventually start to believe it. And I think we need to stop saying that. We need to stop telling people that, especially our young people. We need to tell them, actually, you live in the best country in the world, in the best time to be alive. You can become absolutely anything you want to. Just get your head in those books, work hard, and get on with it. Simple as.
Your message clearly goes contrary to that which is perpetuated by movements such as the Black Lives Matter movement. Now, as a movement, they are somewhat controversial, at least for over the past year or so. They've become controversial. Now, this is a movement that surely, for a movement that stands for racial equality, how can they be viewed as being controversial? I mean, that is what they stand for, right?
Nice one, Paul. No, but that's the problem, isn't it? So they dress it up in a pretty wrapping paper and say, we are the anti-racists, because what's the opposite of anti-racist? It's racist. No one wants to be seen as racist. So of course you want to join the anti-racists. But as we've talked about, that's not what they're about at all. They are about, as Trevor said, destroying our way of life and rebuilding it in their own neo-Marxist image. I think that's absolutely the case. If you look at all the campaigns they're pushing for, who would want to be against family? Why would anyone want to be against the nuclear family, two parents looking after and raising kids, when all the evidence suggests that that is the best way for a child to thrive? And I'm not being against single parents. I come from a single parent background myself, as I mentioned earlier. This is not me being stigmatizing anyone. This is just saying we want all kids to have the best possible start in life, and that comes from a strong, stable family. So therefore, we need to encourage family life rather than discourage it. And so Black Lives Matter against the family. Their Twitter feed was heavily anti-Semitic against Israel, against Jewish people. For a movement to call itself anti-racist and then publish racism. It is bonkers. And we've seen a lot of that. You know, every time I speak up against Black Lives Matter and say, actually, they're very toxic, they're divisive, they're unhelpful, they're stoking racial tensions where they didn't exist to begin with. Every time I speak up and say these things, how do they debate me? How do they argue against me ad hominem? They attack me for being black or not black enough, or for being black-ish, or for being an Uncle Tom or a coon, or any of these slave master derogatory terms. So again, they're racist. And for these things, who is it that says they are the very thing they accuse you of? Because it's so spot on. You know, they accuse everyone of being racist, whereas they are the racists themselves. And I don't think they see it a lot of the time as well. That's what upsets me the most. Every time one of these people attacks me on Twitter, it's like, do you realize what you're doing right now? Do you realize you are being toxic, divisive, racist, all of the things you're accusing everyone else of being? And the hypocrisy is frustrating.
So, do you think that the Black Lives Matter movement have had the opposite effect in terms of, you know, bringing to light and helping to tackle racial inequality? Do you think that their approach has really been counterproductive in achieving that goal?
Yeah, it's been completely counterproductive. The evidence suggests that racial tensions have increased since March, since Black Lives Matter really took off, and for a movement to claim that it's trying to make racial inequalities, to solve the problem of racial inequalities in the country, and actually be stoking up racial tensions as a result of their movement, it kind of says it all, really, doesn't it? I can personally vouch for that. I can tell you I had more racial abuse this year than I have in the rest of my adult life. A majority of that has been from Black Lives Matter supporters, and most of them have been black. So maybe it's not racism, maybe it's colorism, I don't know. But it's definitely there, and there's definitely more of it. You know, people said after Brexit, we're going to see more racial intolerance and stuff, and I didn't see anything after Brexit. I saw a few little nuggets from both sides, which was disgusting and intolerable. But on the whole, I didn't see much. Whereas after Black Lives Matter, an anti-racist movement, I've seen a lot more racism, and mostly from the hard left. So it's not from the people that they are targeting. It's really strange.
Turning towards sports just for a second, Calvin, and again, you mentioned it earlier in our conversation. We see every week footballers taking the knee before every single game. Now, football has just opened its stadium doors to fans, and just about within the last week, it was the Millwall versus Derby football match. When the players took a knee, you could see and hear the fans booing the gesture on the part of the players, which in itself drew a lot of criticism from senior people within the sport and beyond. Only a few days later, though, at the Millwall and QPR game, players instead linked arms and brandished the banner saying "Inequality, United for Change." This in itself didn't draw any negative reaction, in fact, quite the opposite. Do you think that the original incident was steeped in latent racism, or was it actually an act of public protest or condemnation of those adopting what some have referred to as a subservient position towards the Black Lives Matter movement, and consequently, you know, almost kind of promoting what it stands for?
Yeah, so I think it was absolutely fantastic that the Millwall fans made their voices heard. When the players took a knee, they were like, no, we're not having that. You've gotten away with that over the last few months because the whole of the football sport has gotten away with that over the last few months because crowds haven't been in the stadiums. Now the crowds are back. They're speaking up and saying, we don't want this woke political nonsense in our game. Thank you very much. And it wasn't a statement of racism as much as the mainstream media tried to hype it up to be, because as you rightly said, they all applauded when the footballers stood up with a banner that said inequality. So football fans in general seem to be against inequality. They seem to be for justice and equality, but they are against political movements. They're against Black Lives Matter and their neo-Marxist ways. And it's about time everyone else woke up to this as well. We shouldn't have football teams jumping on a bandwagon like this. We've got plenty of good, legitimate anti-racist campaigns in football, like Kick It Out, one that I was involved in about 10 years ago. And there are another couple of good campaigns like that that have made a difference, and that are actually campaigning to do things, to make a difference, to make positive impact in football, in the sport. Whereas Black Lives Matter aren't. And taking a knee doesn't. It doesn't help in any way. What does it do? What does it proactively change? Nothing. People can say it raises awareness. It might raise awareness, but for Black Lives Matter, which is a political campaign, if not a political party at this point. And I had an argument with John Barnes about this, because he's saying that it's not Black Lives Matter the organization, it's Black Lives Matter the movement. I'm like, what? First of all, what is the difference between the two? And is there one? I don't understand people who can separate those two, because Black Lives Matter are clearly a toxic, divisive organization that are against the British way of life. So it shouldn't be supported in any way. And if people are against racism, fantastic, I'm against racism. But we don't need to use their banner to do that. There are plenty of other banners we can use.
Calvin, you've just preempted my next question, so thank you so much for that. My question was going to be whether you thought that we could actually separate the social movement for equality, which I think, as you rightly said, with the Kick It Out campaign, everyone got behind it, everyone firmly believes in kicking racism out of football. Separating that movement from the political aspect of the party, because Black Lives Matter now are officially a political party, and taking a knee has very much become synonymous with that movement. So again, you've kind of already answered the question, but the question was going to be, is it possible to separate the social movement and the political aspect of the group?
No, because it is a political movement. So it's not, you can't separate the two. It's one thing that's going on. And if people are supporting Black Lives Matter at this point, after everything we know about it, then I have very cynical views of those people. I think we've been educated. We all know what Black Lives Matter are about, what they stand for, who the people are behind it. If you're still supporting Black Lives Matter at this point in time, you need to have a good, strong look in the mirror and think about where you are and what your values are.
Focusing now back onto you for just one moment before we wrap up. Again, you've spoken about this. You've spoken about a lot of the abuse that you've received online for simply expressing what many would describe as mildly conservative views. Why do you think that is, and how do you cope with that level of abuse?
So, as to why it is, it's because I ruin it for them. I don't subscribe to the approved narrative that they want all Black people to, they want us to sing from the same hymn sheet, that we are victims, we are oppressed, because it helps them. It helps the hard left if we're all saying the same thing, because they can keep perpetuating this myth. But I don't believe it. I don't believe I'm held back because of the color of my skin in this country. I don't believe that white people are oppressing me. I don't believe that I'm a victim. So I will continue to stand up against it. But every time I do, they kind of void their own argument, because they're saying they're arguing for equality and diversity. But surely with equality and diversity comes people of the same skin color with different opinions. If everyone of the same color had the same opinion, that wouldn't be equal or diverse. Well, it would be equal. It wouldn't be very diverse, would it? So I always struggle with campaigns for diversity that don't want diversity of opinion, because it turns out that they usually just want more brown faces that think alike, and that's very worrying for me to see too much groupthink and mentality in organisations like the BBC, like Black Lives Matter. All these campaign groups these days are campaigning for the same thing. But as to how I handle it, I don't know. I don't have a thick skin. I really don't. Every time someone attacks me, it does hurt. It's not nice. It's not pleasant at all. And people always say, well, you need a thick skin, you're in politics. And I say, actually, it's the opposite. We always say we want more normal people in politics. We want less career politicians. We want less sociopaths and more people with compassion and empathy. And if we want that, we have to treat people well. We have to treat them right, treat them as human beings. We can't throw ad hominem attacks at people all the time. We can't destroy people based on their appearance, or even if it is their views. We should debate people well. We should argue well. And we don't at the moment. And I think it's horrible. That's probably one of the reasons I don't think I'll ever run for office again, because it's just not something you want to put yourself through. And something needs to change. People need to realize that, and it's social media that perpetuates this. Social media is evil. because people forget that it is a human being at the other end of that keyboard, and they'll just launch an attack, and it's very inflammatory. But if people stopped and thought, who am I talking to? Why am I saying this? And why am I so upset? What is it? What message am I trying to get across here? If people said to me, Calvin, you're wrong because X, Y, Z, I'd be like, oh, okay, well, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm not completely sure on this point or whatever. I'm not always right. And I'm happy to be told where I am wrong. But they don't. They go, oh, you're an effing coon. Oh, you're a traitor, race traitor, X, Y, Z. It's like, well, why? Tell me why I'm wrong. Don't just attack me for the color of my skin or for not having the same opinion as you. Tell me where I'm going wrong. Debate me. And likewise, I think this ties into cancel culture as well, actually. The idea that if you do or say something wrong or that people don't agree with, you get written off. We've become far less forgiving. We need to go back to good old-fashioned Christian values, that if someone says or does something wrong, sure, they might need to be reprimanded for that, depending on what it is and what context it is. But after that, there should be an apology from that person, followed by forgiveness from everyone else. And we don't see that, and especially on social media, we don't see that. These bandwagons, people quote tweeting and people jumping on board to attack each other. It's very toxic, it's nasty. I think social media was a mistake, to be honest. And I say this as someone who obviously uses social media a lot, but another way that I get around this is that I use social media to put out my stuff. I share my content. So I share my opinions through my articles or interviews or whatever, and I put it out there. And I'm happy for people to debate it. I'm happy for people to come back with opposing views, but I don't tend to engage very often on social media with people that are hostile. I'll just instantly block, instantly mute, and people can call it weak if they like, but you know what? My mental health is my mental health. I don't need these aggressive, nasty people in my life. So I'll just, goodbye. If people want to talk to me properly and have a good conversation, fine, that's perfectly okay. But if people want to attack me, they're not worth my time.
So, Calvin, if I could give you a magic wand, and with that great power, you had the opportunity to change society, especially in this country, at least, for the better, what kind of positive changes would you like to see?
Oh gosh, with a magic wand, I would like to. I think we need to fix the education system. I'd like to take out all of the left-wing indoctrination that's going on in education and make sure that all of our public institutions, from the BBC all the way through the government quangos, I would like to make sure all of them are diverse in thought and opinion. I would love for there to be more acceptance of people with different views, and I would like to encourage people to debate well. I'd like to encourage people to forgive, and I would love to see our history, people stop trying to erase our history, removing our statues, rewriting things. Um, so I suppose just wave the magic wand of good old British values, good old fashioned Christian values. Um, that'll do the trick.
Finally, Calvin, before we wrap up, I have to ask you, what does the future hold for Calvin Robinson?
Oh. Well, I'm reading theology at Oxford at the moment. I'm training for holy orders. So I imagine a very quiet life away from media and social media and politics and all of that stuff. I imagine. Who knows where God will take me? I want to serve my community in the best way that I can, and I don't know. We'll see where I'm called to do and what I'm called to do. I'll discern on it and pray on it.
Well, Calvin, listen, thank you so much for joining us on the bubble today. It's been fascinating and wonderful to catch up with you again. Uh, to those of you at home who are watching, I hope you enjoyed the show and the insights that we've offered into the remarkable Calvin Robinson. If you liked it, please click on the like button below and also subscribe to the channel to receive updates every time we upload a new video to the channel. In the meantime, take care. Thanks very much for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye bye.